Gonna damage the.
Hello, and welcome to our panel. This panel is titled Burn the Maps, and we're going to take that kind of title and use it in a couple of different ways. So firstly, we're going to be looking at some of the new ways to navigation is changing in the automotive industry, but also we're going to look a little bit more broadly, and we're going to look at the new roadmap for automotive, how things are changing, how new ways of building software, new ways of building the very cars themselves are changing the cars we'll be driving in the future. So without much further ado, let's get into it. Gideon, so let's start with you. We're talking about the future of navigation here, and ChargeTrip is one of the companies looking at exactly how we use navigation and mapping in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that fits in with the rest of the kind of the ecosystem we're looking at here?
Yeah, absolutely. So as our driving paradigms are changing, and there are a lot, navigation becomes much more important, as becomes the whole software stack of an automotive. So essentially, like the short answer would be, we're moving a lot more people to a lot more places, and the journeys are a lot more complexer than they used to be. The longer answer is that if you look at AutoTech and mobility paradigms in detail, then we're seeing that the industry is converging to a point where hardware is becoming less important and software is becoming more important. So some of the big challenges that automotives face now is figuring out how to become a software company, how to keep that hardware place intact, and how to become a software company. And this is obviously something that Jan is working on pretty hard from a Porsche perspective, and we are from a startup perspective as is Risto. So as you're seeing that journeys are becoming more complex because they're autonomous or they're fully electric, and we absolutely believe that the future is going to be electric, then you see that there's all these external variables that suddenly impact the range of a vehicle, that impact your driving and charging experience, and the optimizations that you're doing to that new paradigm is software driven and not hardware driven. Okay. So this whole user experience is changing, and you need a different type of approach as an automotive from a navigation perspective, but also from a user experience perspective to be able to cater to those new paradigms.
Yeah, because traditionally you would expect those kinds of services to be provided by the automakers themselves, but it's now startups like who are providing those services and delivering that sort of thing.
Yeah, so without being disrespectful, typically you used to route someone from A to B, and you would do that, you would optimize by time. And all of a sudden you have all these new different types of context that you're adding to a journey that make it a lot more complex to do. And the same could be said for optimizing a vehicle like the Porsche Taycan, which is fully electric. A lot of the optimizations in that vehicle are software driven because you suddenly need to deal with how does energy flow? How do we increase charge capacity when you're charging? How do we heat the battery? All that kind of stuff you never had to worry about. So you need to pull that into innovation that's pretty new to these car companies into your company. And how do you do that through engaging with startups?
Okay, so Jan, can you say a little bit more about that kind of engaging with startups? Because obviously you kind of worked with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. We're working really hard together with startups to push some of the technology on the fast lane, and so we are aware that can build really nice cars. You can see it here, it's like a nice design, we have powerful cars, but we have somehow to get on the level to bring emotions on a digital level, and that's the reason why we really engaging with ChargeTrip and high mobility and looking into, for example, like how we can bring these emotions to navigation, for example. So we're looking into, or let's say, like a Porsche is not there to get from A to B as fast as possible. Instead, you want to somehow more enjoy your trip. And so we're looking into what you can see on the street or what is the context. So it's like if you want to drive in mountains, lakes, or the coast, so we can like somehow provide a user by another experience to choose a route next to the lake or next to the sea, which is like really nice. So we somehow bring it to the digital level, I would say.
Right. So Risto, I want to bring you in as well. I mean, what we seem to be seeing here is a different kind of model for building cars and building the experience of driving. So why is this all changing? How is this all changing?
Yeah. So with High Mobility, we have a mission building the best car data company in the world. And why we are essentially doing it, like when we came up with this topic for the talk, Burn the Maps, the whole point is that the actual came, or the idea that car makers needed to figure out everything on their own, it's not really relevant for the future anymore. So car makers can be much more open to the developers outside of the organizations and allow them to build the services of the future, like ChargeShip is doing with Porsche and so on. So high mobility is just an enabler, essentially, making it really easy for developers to build services with vehicle data.
Yeah. And do we see that the automotive makers are embracing this now? Is this something they are understanding and getting involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say free speech is coming to the car industry. So the car makers who were very closed for almost 100 years are now really opening up, because it's just not possible to do everything on their own in the digital era.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add something to that. It's like, you know, like building a car will take like 6 to 7 years, and now we're having this like fast processes, like startups providing, like they really developing products, digital products really fast, and so we somehow have to think about how we can bring that in car, and then like high mobility is some company who helps us in this process.
Yeah. I mean, so Gideon, I mean, how does automotive deal with this big culture change? So it goes from, like we see here, these kind of like building mechanical things to building a kind of a software environment, and which people like you might be plugging into, you may be enabling that, and you may be so there's lots of different variables now, so it's a very different world.
So I would say traditionally very poorly. Huh?
Right.
How they deal with this. Obviously there's outliers, and I think much of the industry over the last 2 years has changed a lot. So people within these big car companies, within these big incumbent companies, are seeing that they're moving from traditional supply chain, where essentially you're pre-purchasing a whole lot of steel, to pre-purchasing SaaS solutions, which is just a completely different ballgame.
Yeah.
However, a lot of these car companies are catching up, like Risto said. This idea of having a data layer and being able to allow companies like us to do something with that data to improve a driving and charging experience is something that is now being adopted quite rapidly. Especially Porsche is doing a great deal in the industry to make that happen.
But it must be quite hard to bring, Risto, it must be quite hard to bring those two different cultures together, a culture of engineering, like you were saying earlier, Jan, that might take 7 years to build a car, with software iterations where you're having daily stand-ups or whatever. I mean, bringing those two cultures together must be a really hard thing.
It is. I think my job is 90% of diplomacy and politics with the car makers, trying to understand their problems, because when we started like a few years ago, it was still a normal thing that you set up a meeting with the car maker and they say, yes, let's meet, sounds interesting. Next time we can meet is 6 weeks from now. For car maker it's normal, but for startups that's like half of the lifetime sometimes. So we set up to build a platform that would really kind of disconnect actually first these two worlds. So we built a platform that has a standardized layer for APIs as like building blocks. Then we built virtual cars, so you don't need to actually have a test car anymore. You can do everything in a web browser. And then we built a digital kind of workflow that you could actually sign up with the platform, use the tools we have, work with the API independently, test it with virtual cars, and do a checkout essentially. And that could take only a few weeks. And we have already, as High Mobility, done the platform integrations with all the car makers. So you don't actually need to get in touch with car makers necessarily anymore.
Okay, so yeah, Gideon. Yeah.
So I think, in part it's also our responsibility as a startup to be educators. Right, when you come into one of these big companies, there's a lot to do in terms of getting people up to speed with digital innovation. Specifically when it comes to car companies, they're being pulled into this new reality, for example, where you need to be autonomous, right? No one wanted to be autonomous in these car businesses. No one wanted to be fully electric, but they're being pulled into this new reality. So if all of a sudden you have to build an electric car like the Taycan, you have to deal with all these new other complexities that electric driving has, right? So you need to deal with battery management. You need to deal with people finding charge stations, which is not something you had to do before. You need to understand that when people start driving electric, they need to pay for that electricity somewhere, and they might also need to use a bathroom, right? So we've been sort of inherently accepting that, okay, if you put gas into your car, you can use a bathroom, you can get a cup of coffee. That's just not true anymore. So you're selling this really expensive Porsche car, which is fully electric. It's an awesome machine, but the experience around it is very different than what you're used to. So all of a sudden, you as a company need to deal with this stuff. And that's also where startups are able to help you, because they think from a different mindset. They're only driven by innovation, and they need to innovate, otherwise they die, right? So that's also part of, our ingrain into these big businesses is to educate them and to help them find this new paradigm.
Yeah, I think and maybe it's because the idea of driving itself is changing. So it's not, like you say, when it's about charging, it's not about, I just need to charge. It's about, well, maybe I'll need to do some shopping while I'm there because I'll be charging for half an hour or whatever. And it's a different way of thinking about the whole experience.
Absolutely. And then, obviously, if we want to solve those issues, so if we're a routing engine, we're much like TomTom or here, but we do it specifically for electric cars because we think electric cars add additional complexity, and we take that away by being very predictive. We're able to deal with topography, with the weather, with all those outside variables that impact the range of the vehicle. But if we want to unlock that and work with an automotive, then all of a sudden we need high mobility. Right? You need a segregation layer in between that gets you vehicle data. That was never there before. So all those little things add up for an automaker, right? Suddenly you need to have data segregation. Then you need to have another company that does EV-specific routing. You need to have someone that does battery management. So all these things come into your path. And then you need Jan, who ties everything together and makes that work.
Yeah,
so
sorry, Risto, I cut you off, sorry.
No, I think, to be fair, there is one real big change in the industry, and it's for a long time for car makers, it was something called not invented here syndrome, I think, as for many big companies. So anything that came from outside wasn't really good enough. And the way that car makers worked with startups maybe 5-10 years ago was more that, could we just buy this idea or bring these guys in and make this idea into our own? But now it's starting to be much more collaborative, where startups can exist as independent entities and work with car makers almost like equals. So it's a sort of a symbiosis that is happening, not much more than bringing the great ideas and protecting them in the
Yeah, and probably bring you in here because the car makers have been getting a bit of a bashing there for their old. But you're you're one of the people who's trying to change that, right? You're trying to make them more sort of like open to this kind of engagement.
Yeah, sure. So it sounds really smooth as you are talking, like we are working together and stuff like that. But I think it was like not a fast way we did, so it was like really a long process how we got to this kind of open thinking or open-minded. So we have different kind of accelerators where I think both of you took
Startup Autobahn
and APX. So it's like maybe to say some words about that. So we have like this nice 100-day project together with startups to really think that we can bring technology fast into the car, and we have that's like a really fast process, and we work more on a collaborative level together. It's not like we tell the startup we need that and then we wait for 100 days and we get it. It's more like really we have weekly interactions, and I mean you are really flexible, so it's like really nice. We can really bring our thinking and our needs into your product, and I think it's more a win-win situation. So you get really good user feedback and you get have a good platform like Porsche cars, and then I mean and for us we really see the edge technology coming into our cars, which makes it more on a digital level better, I would say.
Okay. And do you find that those kind of startup ideas of moving faster and thinking about the customer, do you find that kind of like you're bringing that from them into your kind of organization? Do you feel that you're taking on some of their ideas as well as buying their products or using their products? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, the other processes were really slow, and I mean, it's like a huge product and really complex. And I think, as you said, it's like also on a digital level getting more complex. So we're having a lot of data coming together, and we add our own internal data to that. And it's like I think we need some rethinking and how we get from this hardware-driven company to also not a fully digital-driven company, but we need we have to find a good interaction model to bring both worlds together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and then looking at it from the other side, Risto, Gideon, when you're engaging with these big corporates, do you kind of take some learnings from that as well? Because presumably these companies have been around for a long time, they know how to do things pretty effectively. Is there sharing on both ways?
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
While startups are very agile, I think car makers still know how to do or how to deliver very complex projects in scale. So
Yeah.
you can't really do A/B testing with cars on the road. Tesla tried, but there are some consequences. So definitely what we learned from Porsche is the way they actually approach problems and really rationalize what makes sense. And then if something makes sense, how to make it in with the highest quality possible.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree. It's and it's also very important for startups to be able to work with big incumbent businesses, not only because it helps you understand what it is like to work with a process where maybe a car takes 6-7 years to build and there's a stop on software in the last 2 years. So it introduces you to that supply chain and to that sales cycle, which is really important to get to know. And also, funnily enough, there's incredibly smart people at these big companies now, because the problems that they need to solve, also software problems, they are pretty tricky, especially as we get into the autonomous field, as we get into electricity management field. Yeah, these are very complex problems, and for a startup, it's hard to find that expertise. It's also very hard to pay for that expertise. But so working with a startup, you get to also work with those people, but maybe at a less expense.
Yeah. So what would be your advice, Jan, to a startup that wanted to work with you or wanted to work with a big auto company but just didn't know what to do?
Sorry again, please.
If a company a startup wanted to work with, say, Porsche or another big automotive, what would be your advice to them?
For startups, I mean, like, you know, we are here at this big conferences to, I mean, our main, we see that here as opportunity to connect with startups, to like really get inspired. But so we are really open to any kind of startups. It's like not like only the automotive part. It's more like we have to really look into the broader spectrum of mobility, because like it's not like, I mean, we are good in automotive things, but it's more like the other things around that to connect. And it's like not you only drive, it's more like what you're doing before and after driving as well. So it's also like the entertainment chain, but also like smart home and stuff like that. So this could be all connected to the car, and that's what we are looking here as well.
Okay, and Risto, how do you see this developing over, say, the next few years? Do you see more engagement with through systems like yours with more startups and more, just more and more of everything? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite unusual anyway that car makers have started to come to these tech and startup festivals. So I was with Porsche in another conference only maybe 3 years ago, first time, and most startups walking past were very perplexed. Wow, what is Porsche doing here? Are they hiring? Are they looking for talent? Are they looking for clients or partners and so on? So it's really changing how car makers are putting themselves out there to the wild, essentially.
Yeah.
And they're setting up digital enterprises or digital divisions, where Jan is from.
Yeah.
So they're making it much more easy to get in touch, actually.
Right. Okay. So yeah, Gideon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like if you look at the next couple of years, you know, if you do not embrace digital transformation or innovation, and if you don't really invest in trying to get on new ideas on board, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. You know, there's so much convergence happening in this industry where essentially hardware technology is not really the biggest differentiator anymore. It's how we optimize the software and the experience of the driver that becomes the biggest differentiator. And this is something that's not embedded in every car maker's DNA at the moment. You need to really invest in that, or it's going to be over.
Okay, great. And I think you've got another session later, is that right?
Yeah, we have like at our Porsche booth, we will talk about more on a technical level, I think, as well, about the topic of maps and also like how we collaborate with startups. So like, just come there and have a chat with us.
Brilliant. I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of your day here. Thank you.